r/Nosleep. Posted by Reddit user travisliebert. My grandmother just died, and now my mom is making me go back to the cemetery to help her with some favors. I really don't know where to start. Part of me wants to start with those things I saw. Those terrible noises. That awful smell. I can't stop thinking about it. But it wouldn't make any sense to you if I started there, so I'll start at the very beginning of this whole mess. My grandmother died 3 days ago. It was sad, of course, but her death wasn't unexpected. She had been sick for a long time before that, and we knew it was only a matter of time before she finally passed. I can't say I really felt anything. We weren't particularly close, and I made peace with her death long before it happened. Towards the end, she got pretty delusional. She started talking about some deal she made, about how the pact had to be completed, the inheritance secured. Anyway, the strangest thing about my grandmother's death was my mom's reaction. It was her mother who had died, so I expected her to be pretty upset by her death. And she was at first, but within a few hours of hearing the news, she underwent a complete personality change. She started complaining about how annoying it was that government felt the need to govern dead people's bodies. She said that she didn't want to bury Grandma normally, that she was sick of all the regulations. And this was odd considering she had always been well reserved and never previously discussed politics with any seriousness. I assumed she was lashing out at anything to help deal with the grief. Yesterday was the visitation. It was normal as far as visitations go. People filled in to look at the body and say their last goodbyes. Family and friends gathered in little clusters to discuss memories of Grandma. The children and the family ran around the funeral home and were promptly scolded and then sent off where they couldn't bother those in mourning. However, while I was there, I overheard a discussion between my mom and Aunt Tracy. They spoke quietly in an isolated corner of the funeral home when I happened to walk by and catch some of what they were saying. "Are you sure it'll be okay?" Aunt Tracy asked. "I really have to get back for my meeting, but I can miss it if you absolutely need help." "No, it's fine," my mom replied. "I can handle it by myself. I'm the eldest after all, so the responsibility is mine." And that's strange, I thought. Were they talking about the eulogy? I thought my cousin was supposed to do it. "You promise the pact will be fulfilled?" my aunt asked. "Yes, I assure you I can handle this. Go back to North Carolina for whatever meeting you have. I'll handle everything here." I wondered what they were talking about. It clearly wasn't the eulogy. And what did they mean by pact? They were beginning to sound like Grandma. "Okay, just make sure it gets done properly. We're in jeopardy here." The conversation was coming to a close, and I made my way to another room so they wouldn't catch me listening. I had no idea what they were talking about. How were they in jeopardy? Maybe it was a financial thing. Funerals were expensive, but Aunt Tracy was quite wealthy, and though my dad had left a long time ago, my mother was still pretty well off. I figured it was some secret family dispute that I would inevitably find out about once it grew into epic proportions, as family disputes always do. I shrugged it off and continued with my day. The visitation proceeded as usual, and the funeral was earlier in the morning. I noticed that Aunt Tracy wasn't there. The mass ended without incident, and we all shuffled out and proceeded to the burial. The cemetery was a small, decrepit one near a wooded area. I don't think anyone had been buried there in 50 years. I wasn't sure why Grandma had bought a plot there, as all of our other family members were buried at a large cemetery near the center of the city. The burial continued in the usual manner. Some people cried as the priest spoke his final words, and the casket was lowered down into the ground. Everyone said their goodbyes and then gathered in little circles and chatted, while the sun beat down on our black attire. Eventually, everyone decided it was time to leave and begin heading to the cars. That's when the day took a turn for the worse. I was walking with my mother to her car when she tripped over a piece of broken headstone that protruded from the ground. She landed awkwardly, and I heard her cry out in pain. She rolled over and clutched her wrist. "Fuck, I think it's broken," she said. I kneeled down beside her and examined it. The joint was angled awkwardly, and it already seemed to be swelling. "Oh, I think you're right." "Oh shit," my mother said. "I won't be able to finish it." My eyebrows raised at that. "Finish what?" She glanced at me, and then spoke quickly. "Nothing. Don't worry about it." After that, she went quiet, and I got the impression that she was intensely worried, though I didn't know why. I drove her to a hospital and was informed that her wrist had indeed been fractured. She sat in stony silence throughout the whole ordeal. When we returned home, she spent nearly an hour pacing back and forth in the kitchen, absent-mindedly rubbing the cast around her wrist. She seemed to be in deep thought, and I heard her muttering under her breath once or twice. Finally, she stopped and found me sitting in the living room watching TV. "I need you to do me a favor." "What's that?" I asked. "Can you drive me to the cemetery?" I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "You can probably still drive yourself," I said, nodding to her wrist. "It shouldn't hinder you too much." You're probably right, but it's dark and I'd rather not risk it." I sighed. It wouldn't be fair of me to prevent her from seeing her own mother's grave, though I didn't know why she wanted to so soon after the burial. "Okay, let me get my keys." "Actually," she said before I could stand up, "I'd prefer if you took my car." I fixed her with an odd stare for a moment, but finally shrugged. I guess it didn't matter which car I took. 10 minutes later, we were pulling into the cemetery, driving up the winding road to get as close to Grandma's grave as possible. When I parked, my mother spoke again. "I actually have one more favor to ask you." "What?" I asked. Without another word, she got out of the car and moved to the trunk, where she grabbed something I couldn't see. Then she began walking towards Grandma's burial plot. I hopped out and followed her, trying to make out what was in her hand. It was too dark to tell at my distance. My mother moved quickly, and I had to practically jog just to keep up. Moments later, I found her waiting for me at the headstone. I finally saw what she was holding. It was a shovel. "What the fuck is that for?" I said, glancing at a fresh mound of dirt next to me, with a sinking feeling in my gut. "Listen," my mom said, stepping close to me. "I need you to trust me right now. I know this is gonna sound crazy, and maybe even repulsive, but I'm begging you to please just trust me on this." I waited in silence for her to respond, though deep down I knew what she was going to say. "I need you to dig up the body." No way," I said, and I took a step back. "Why would you ever want to do that?" "I can't explain it right now, but I can't do it with my wrist like this. I need you to..." She was cut off by a second branch snapping in the forest of my left. It sounded like something big had just looped past it. "Shit," she said as she handed me the shovel. "Please, just hurry up and do it." I don't know why, but the sound of her voice, the sense of urgency emphasized by a slight tremble, made me reach out and grab the shovel. I looked in her eyes, and despite the dim moonlight, I could see that she was scared. As I began to dig, she urged me to move faster and faster. It was exhausting work, but fortunately the dirt was freshly laid and loose. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to do it. The hole grew deeper and deeper as the sounds of nearby movement became almost constant. I noticed my mother whirling around and peering into the darkness. Just before my shovel hit the casket, the other sounds began. They're hard to explain, like high-pitched yipping noises, something between a bird's chirp and a dog's whimper. My hair stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine. I didn't know of any animal that made that noise. "What's that? Hurry!" my mom hissed down, cutting off my question. I uncovered the rest of the casket until it was fully visible. Then, with a glance at my mother, I opened the lid to see Grandma's arms folded, in her best dress. My mother climbed down into the hole with me. "Help me pick her up," she said. I hesitated, but finally complied and grabbed her by her shoulders, as my mother took her by the legs. We hoisted her out of the hole and laid her on the soft, wet grass. My mother scrambled out and gestured for me to follow quickly. Finally, we stood outside the hole, looking down at my grandmother's body, as those strange sounds surrounded us. This is when the smell hit me. At first, I thought it was from the body, but I realized the mortuary's preservatives would have prevented her from decaying so quickly. The scent was disgusting, like rancid meat mixed with the smell of wet dog. I moved to cover my nose, but my mother grabbed my arm and shook her head. "Don't. You'll offend them." That was when they came out of the surrounding woods. The creatures are hard to describe. Humanoid but walking on all fours. Their bodies were extremely lanky and pitch black. The color seemed odd though. It shifted and swirled as if they were merely vessels for some black shadowy mass. "Keep your gaze low, but keep them in your peripheral," my mother said. "Whatever you do, don't look them in the eyes." My legs shook beneath me, and sweat dripped down the back of my neck. "We should go," I whispered. "No, we must bear witness." She stooped down beside Grandma and began to fiddle with something around her neck. Then she stood up and put something around her own. I saw that it was my grandmother's necklace. I'd never seen my grandmother without it. The necklace was a simple piece of twine with a heavy gold ornament on it that consisted of strange interlocking shapes and symbols which seemed to twist upon themselves. "It has been passed down," my mother shouted to the things that came out of the forest. "The pact still stands." With that, the yipping sounds grew to an almost unbearable volume, and those things began to run towards us. I nearly fled, but my mother grabbed my arm and steadied me. Then, they reached my grandma's body, and the night was filled with the sounds of tearing flesh and broken bones.